Democrats and Republicans actually work together in Washington. Congressman Michael Burgess, a Denton County Republican, our first guest this morning. And joining the questioning, as always, is Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram.
Good morning, Bud.
Congressman, good to see you again.
Well, thanks for having me. I love what you've done with the place.
You haven't been here since we moved over to this studio. Let's talk bipartisanship in just a moment. I want to start with the headlines first, though. Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner using a private email account and even a popular messaging service, WhatsApp, that I talk to my friends in Asia on as well, too. They're using this for official business, White House business, according to reports. When Hillary Clinton did it, you called for the DOJ to appoint a special prosecutor. Should that happen in this case?
Well, look, anyone who works in the White House needs to follow the guidelines. I don't know that we know the entire story here, but clearly it needs to be looked at, and yes, all personnel need to follow the guidelines.
Should a special prosecutor look into this?
I don't know that at this point it's at that level, but everyone needs to play by the same rules.
On October 21st of 2016, in your weekly video address regarding Hillary Clinton, you said there should be no question that Secretary Clinton put our national security at risk.
Well, look,
do you think that happened in this case?
Well, again, we don't know, because if it is just a question of doing some individual communication on something that was a non-official source, that's one thing. It was not, at least to my knowledge, equivalent to setting up a separate server in your bathroom, which is what the prior administration had done through the Secretary of State's office. So it's a different order of magnitude, but still, for the sake of everyone involved, everyone needs to play by the same rules.
What should happen in that case, though? I mean, how do you get to the bottom of it?
Well, obviously it will be looked at, and I suspect there will be personnel in the Department of Justice who do make that assessment. But it's not, again, we all need to play by the same rules. I mean, there are requirements around preservation of presidential records. They need to be followed. Speaker
Pelosi said she supports lowering the voting age to 16. You were the only Republican to vote for it. Tell us why.
Well, actually, if I'd seen Speaker Pelosi's remarks first, I might have never done that. What did she say? We got to capture them while we're young? That sounded like something out of Hansel and Gretel, so it made me extremely nervous. But look, I sit on the Rules Committee, and part of my job on the Rules Committee is to evaluate all of the amendments that members bring to the Rules Committee. I'm in the minority now, so I frequently don't win those votes. I had some amendments of my own that I wanted to see made in order. When the representative from Massachusetts presented her thoughts on the voting age, it struck a chord with me, because at 16 and 17, I was working. I was paying those FICA taxes. I didn't even know what they were until I started working. But so you have, if you will, you have skin in the game at that age. And then here's the other thing, and one of the things that has troubled me greatly: the amount of debt that adolescents, as they're entering adolescence and leaving adolescence, the amount of debt that they have accrued, number one, just the structural debt in the national debt. But then there is also this layered on this debt for institutions of higher learning, which cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. There are significant problems here. So here's the point. Would policymakers pay more attention to the problems that are being dealt to this segment of the demographic if policymakers were actually answerable to them? So I think it's worth having the discussion. I wanted the amendment to be made in order, and I spoke to that in the Rules Committee. I also spoke to having my amendments in order. And
do you regret the vote?
No, look, it is important for us to have the discussion. And look, I think, as you can see from the vote, that it's never going to happen. Both sides, both R&D said, we don't want it. We don't want any part of it. So that's old news.
It stays where it is.
It stays where. The bigger problem, there were many other problems in H.R. 1, which was the underlying bill that did pass the House, will not pass the Senate. Of course, the president would veto it, should it pass.
That's what Bud wanted to talk about.
You have a veto override vote coming up.
Yes, we do.
Is there a point to be made here? It's not going to pass, probably, but what point are the Democrats trying to make? What point do you want the Republicans to make?
On this veto override, on the National Emergency Act and the security of the southern border? Look, I think we've seen from the headlines this past week, the numbers from last month, 76,000 people were apprehended. That's the ones we know about, who came into the country without benefit of following the normal rules. That's an astounding number. And what you're hearing the latter part of this week is that the Customs and Border Patrol is simply overwhelmed by the number of people that are coming in. That's a problem. That is a problem. We don't know who's coming into the country, what they're bringing with them, whether it's diseases or drugs or just people searching for jobs. It doesn't it does rise to the level of a national emergency. So I think the president was well within executive power to say, look, you gave this tool to the executive branch in the 1970s. I'm using it. Same as he did with tariffs, because the tariff rule, remember, that he exercised was passed in 72.
Would you feel differently if you had a big military base in your district? We have Republicans in Texas that don't like this because it's taking money out of Fort Hood, money out of Fort Bliss, money out of the Air Force Base in Abilene.
No higher requirement than the defense of our nation. However, last September 30th, as you'll recall, $716 billion was appropriated for defense appropriations. Part of that appropriation was for interdiction of drugs on the border, so I think it's entirely appropriate to use that money. $716 billion in the fiscal year we are in now, $700 billion for the fiscal year we just finished up last year. Secretary Mattis came to us and said, we need to rebuild the military. We are going to need this money. And they got the money for the first time in forever under the Trump administration. So when he pledged to rebuild the military, I think he's proving that he's a man of his word there. Some of those dollars, I mean, $716 billion, and we're talking about, what was it, 3.4 that would be used for drug interdiction. It's a fraction.
I want to switch off to that bipartisan legislation we talked about at the very beginning here as well, too.
I was wondering what that was, too.
You're working across the aisle, Congressman, on the Troll Act. It's to clean up what you call a massive drag on the economy and prevent the misuse of patents. Give me an idea, how big of a deal is this and why is this needed?
Well, when I was chairman of the Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade Subcommittee a couple of Congresses ago, this came to my attention. Of course, Eastern District of Texas is where a vast number of those lawsuits are filed.
Federal court over there, yeah.
Correct. So you have someone who runs a motel and they have a Wi-Fi that they make available to their guests. And then they're hit with a demand letter, hey, you're using our patent inappropriately, and we ask that you give us $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 to avoid a lawsuit. And these blanket letters, I mean, just the phenomenal number of letters that go out that are then distributed. Yeah. We had an interesting thing here where Apple decided to move the location of a couple of their stores, so they are no longer in the jurisdiction of the Eastern District of Texas, and now they're in the Northern District, so that when these cases are heard, they're no longer in that court that is apparently very favorable to patent trolls.
They closed the Collin County stores. Thanks for working across the aisle. It's good to see you guys getting some good stuff done up there, too. Congressman Burgess, good to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Beto